Hey guys, what's up? This is Dingo Crikey here with another commentary video, this time a general Transformers discussion topic. If you're interested in more news and commentary on Transformers 5, the Transformers Age of Extinction toy line, or the upcoming Transformers Robots in Disguise cartoon, then check out my playlist and channel where you can also find over 20 of my Transformers stop motion videos, some of which are previewed here. But for this video, I'm going to be discussing the topic of, is Transformers really about Starscream? Or is Starscream sort of the main character of Transformers? So this wasn't necessarily a requested topic, but I have gotten similar requests pertaining to Starscream's potential appearance in Transformers 5, or people discussing the fact that he's going to be absent from Robots in Disguise, or at least the first season. And instead of doing a video for Starscream's appearance in Transformers 5 or his absence in Robots in Disguise, I've kind of been reflecting on Starscream's character throughout the course of the Transformers series, and it's made me think, is Starscream the most important character in Transformers? So with that question in mind, let's get started. So let's look at Starscream in the current state of Transformers. Like I said, Starscream actually hasn't had as many appearances recently as he's had in the past. Now, that's not to say he hasn't appeared for years upon years or anything like that. It's just we're used to seeing Starscream make an appearance in about every single toy line, every TV show, and the movies that come out. Well, he didn't appear in Transformers Age of Extinction, and it looks like that at least for the first season of Transformers Robots in Disguise, he won't be making an appearance. Now, we've obviously gotten Starscream figures recently, but even that, we haven't been getting as many as we usually do. Recently, among Transformers fans, there seems to be a lot of controversy about a lot of the new material coming out. Now, the comics still seem to be getting well received, along with the Generations line, both of which have Starscream present, whereas a lot of the other media that's been getting the flack has been stuff like the upcoming cartoon, the movies, the movie toy line. And obviously, this is only a certain group of fans. Mind you, it seems to be a larger group of fans than the usual groups that have negative opinions towards the mainstream stuff. But it probably isn't a direct connection to Starscream's absence. But, you know, as far as Transformers 5 and Age of Extinction, there are definitely people who are upset because Starscream isn't going to appear in those. So while a lot of the negative attention doesn't have to directly deal with Starscream's absence, I mean, that's pretty obvious, it has got me to reflecting on Starscream's role throughout Transformers. So first, let's look at Starscream's appearances in the major forms of Transformers media. I'm not going to go over every single Starscream toy that has been released, but obviously from G1 to Transformers Prime, we have had a ton of different Starscream figures. And usually if Starscream appears in a line, he doesn't only get one figure. Consider the Transformers Cybertron line, where Starscream obviously got that Supreme class figure, and then there was the Voyager Starscream, and also a Legends class Starscream. There might have been something else, but not that I remember. And then Transformers Prime, we have a Deluxe Starscream, a Voyager class, then the first edition Deluxe class figure as well, and probably some other things thrown in there. The movies, he obviously gets a ton of figures in those. So yeah, Starscream gets a ton of toy appearances. Then as far as the major Transformers TV series is, not including different Japanese shows, Starscream has pretty much made an appearance in almost every single one of them, except Beast Machines and the original Robots in Disguise cartoon. And of course, it's too early to know for sure whether or not Starscream is going to appear in the new Robots in Disguise cartoon. But yeah, he's had a lot of appearances throughout the major TV series. And then obviously he had an appearance in every single live action film except for Transformers Age of Extinction. Now, I don't think saying he has had many different appearances necessarily makes him a super significant character, as we've seen with some other characters who've appeared in a ton of different series. For example, we've had characters such as Bumblebee and Soundwave make various appearances in different Transformers cartoons, and though some people may disagree with this, I would argue that they don't really contribute a lot in the long run of the story. Now, that probably varies from series to series, but overall, they're just kind of there, and they're more of supporting characters than actual story drivers. And then you could probably also take into account that there are certain names that reappear throughout different Transformers series, but you can't really count them as similar characters because their personalities are totally different, such as Energon Ironhide from Generation 1 Ironhide. They aren't even really up for comparison against each other because they are totally different characters. I mean, maybe you could argue that, but I don't really see the comparison there. Whereas a character like Starscream, since overall he retains a lot of similar qualities, though they vary, you can kind of put him on this category where you gotta recognize not every single Starscream is the same, obviously, but he does share enough similar qualities in appearance and personality traits, etc. So, as I mentioned, characters like Bumblebee, Soundwave, and even Optimus in some cases aren't often major plot drivers. What I mean by that is while they're there and they are being affected by the main story going on, they aren't actually instigating things that are adding drastic changes to the plot. For example, Bumblebee and Prime did have some stories focused around him, but outside of a few stories inflicting some major Decepticon deaths, he doesn't really drive the story. Or another comparison, we have Tarantula in Beast Wars, who was often coming up with different schemes to kind of subvert Megatron or eradicate the Maximals, and doing all these things that took stories in different directions. He had significant conflict with certain characters, and then we have someone like Scorponok, who was there for the first half of the show, but didn't really contribute a whole lot to the actual story. Now, in Beast Wars, we did have a lot more characters making actual contributions to the story, but in most Transformers series, we have a lot of those characters who just sit on the sidelines and get a few action sequences, funny lines, they kind of establish a personality, if that sometimes, but they don't really add too much to the story. So let's look at each cartoon and how Starscream has contributed to them. Okay, so first we have Generation 1. Obviously, that's a little bit of a hard one to look at because there wasn't like an underlying plot line in Generation 1, but I think it's pretty safe to say Starscream had one of the biggest roles outside of Optimus and Megatron. I mean, usually he was doing the same thing, but he was pretty much always causing problems, always wanting to undermine Megatron. I would say with Generation 1 alone, he's one of the most memorable characters. I mean, whether you like him or hate him, you're probably going to remember him once you've watched a few episodes of the series, whereas certain other characters were definitely more forgettable unless you get into a lot of the expanded universe comics, that kind of stuff. And he was also one of the few characters who returned in Season 3 of the series after being killed off in the movie. Then his next major appearance as a series regular was Transformers Armada. And for those who have seen Armada, you probably know that Starscream had a huge focus in this show. I mean, I would go as far as to say that in the second half of the show, it was sort of like Starscream's show. And if you didn't like his character, you probably weren't going to like the series as a whole. But not only did he just get a lot of time, but he got a lot of development. Probably the most developed character in the series, the second being like probably Hotshot, Thrust, and Sideways. I mean, in this series, we pretty much get to see him kind of going from a typical Starscream, only a little bit more angsty and a little less silly, to being a super developed character who's really conflicted about good and evil, you know, his loyalties, that kind of thing. He was also one of the only characters to have a connection with Megatron that actually developed Megatron's character. You know, we see Megatron in some series have rivals, or Starscream's just the underling that he eventually kills off. And though some might argue, to me it always seemed like in Armada, Megatron did care about Starscream to some extent. Furthermore, I mean, he was a major driver of the story. I mean, he gives the Autobots access to the Decepticons' base, get access to most of their minicons, and pretty much the tide of the series is changed here. And then it's kind of changed again when Starscream reverts to the Decepticons and gives them the minicon weapons. There are some other big plot lines in the series that follow him, sort of like when Wheeljack, Hotshot, and him go underground and find out about Sideways' plans and his base, and ultimately is the one who gets the Autobots and Decepticons to work together and defeat Unicron. So, as far as the story goes, he really had a lot to do with the direction it was taken. Whereas you take another character like Wheeljack, who had development in the series and was given time, and he did affect the story a little bit, but, he definitely didn't drive the story in the same way that Starscream did. And he definitely brought a lot more emotion to the series, which was definitely something we didn't really see in the previous series, Robots in Disguise. So, he had a huge emphasis in this show. Then moving on to Transformers Cybertron. I would say from the beginning he is equal or greater in significance than Megatron as a villain. Megatron is always kind of the guy at the forefront, but Starscream definitely has his own agenda, but he's a lot more subtle about it than Megatron or about previous Starscreams. At least when I was originally watching Cybertron, Starscream was kind of that character who really kept the viewer watching. You're watching to see how he would devise everything and get the upper hand, and then later on in the show, just his struggle and how it would all end. I would say in the middle of the series, he is definitely the main villain for that time period. And that time period where he is the main villain, I would say, is definitely the best part of the show. And I guess it's pretty significant that he single-handedly defeats all of the Autobots. So, yeah, that's pretty significant. I would say in Cybertron, Starscream probably wasn't the most important character, but he's definitely one of them, and I think you could see it that way. You could see him as the most important character in the show. Then we have him in Transformers Animated, another series where he has a really big role. Kind of like with Transformers Cybertron, we're always seeing his struggle throughout Animated, but it's in a much more comical way. The way I seen it, we never really thought Starscream was going to get too powerful in the show or become too big of a threat. He was kind of just always there to, be that comic relief. He does have the biggest emphasis out of all of the Decepticons, and his story was always running throughout the show and always pretty dynamic. Like, he gets his head off at a certain point, he has the whole thing going on with the Allspark, and he can't die, so yeah, there was a lot of significant stuff with him in Animated. It's been a while since I've watched that show, so not everything's fresh in my head. But it definitely was another big series for Starscream. Then in Transformers Prime, kind of the same things going on, like he's always struggling between the different Autobot and Decepticon conflicts. I would say just like in Transformers Animated, he definitely has the biggest emphasis out of all of the Decepticons characters. The series is very dynamic, there's lots of different stuff that happens to him, and he seems to get the biggest focus in regards to a character's story and struggle. Ultimately, someone like Optimus probably does have the most screen time, but I think Starscream's a close runner-up. And I would say in this show, the viewer can kind of sympathize with him. Now, I know a lot of people really hated him in Transformers Prime, but from my point of view, you did feel bad for him, and you could kind of root for him at points. And this is one of the few Starscreams that successfully and convincingly becomes loyal to Megatron once again. It's not something we see a whole lot, and in Transformers Prime he does actually seem to react when Megatron dies at the end of the show. So Transformers Prime was definitely one of the best shows for Starscream. He got a ton of screen time in the show. Now granted, Transformers Prime had more episodes than most Transformers series has had, so all of the characters got a little bit more time, but Starscream was in a ton of the episodes, and he had a good amount of episodes that focused on him. So closing that part of the discussion up, I think it's worth noting that a lot of those series are the ones that are often mentioned as the best Transformers series. Now, there's probably a lot of dissension within that. There are a lot of people who couldn't really get into Transformers Armada, some people who hate on G1. Prime seems to be pretty universally liked, but overall those are series that get a lot of good reception, and whether you like them or not, are pretty memorable. So can it be said that the series without Starscream are necessarily bad because they don't have him? Well, let's take a look. We have Transformers Energon, which did have Starscream, but he had a much, much smaller role and a totally different role than he had in the other series. I mean, he was in a lot of the episodes, but after his first few appearances, he basically became another Decepticon lackey with no significant development. I mean, there was absolutely nothing memorable about this character, in my opinion, other than the fact he had a cool design. That was like pretty much it. He was incredibly bland and just a horrible rendition of Starscream. And I don't think a character always has to be the same in each series they appear in, but he was just pathetically bad in this show. But overall, I would say Energon was a horrible series. I'll probably do a video giving my thoughts on it sometime in the future, but it just had a really bad plot. Seemed like there was no direction to the series. The animation, I really wasn't a big fan of it. But in regards to Starscream, I think it has to be taken into account that none of the characters really had good development in this series. And outside of a few characters, there weren't really many good characters or well-developed characters within Transformers Energon altogether. Even characters who did get development at some points in the story, such as Ironhide, Inferno, or Rodimus, basically that development or anything interesting with their character just disappeared after their episode arc and they became just another Autobot. So the blandness wasn't unique to Starscream's character. It was pretty much everyone in Transformers Energon, in my opinion. If you guys want to refute that in the comment section below, feel free to, but I think it would be pretty hard to defend that series. Next, we have Beast Machines. In my opinion, this show, despite the fact it's very controversial, had a really good story and really good writing. You know, you can criticize it for what it did to Beast Wars, and a lot of that is legitimate, but in it of itself, it is a pretty good show. We had a lot of well-developed characters. Some characters didn't go in the directions people wanted to see them go, but they did have development. And it also had no characters who directly filled in the Starscream role. I mean, I guess you could say Jetstorm and Thrust kind of shared it, and maybe Obsidian a little bit, but no, there was no Starscream character in this show. With saying that, you have to take into account that a lot of people hate Beast Machines as a series. I don't think it's just the Beast Wars thing. I think Beast Machines is a show that just wasn't geared towards the typical Transformers type audience. It dealt with all these like philosophical problems, like a completely technological society and finding inner peace, all of that kind of stuff. And I really just don't think that's the kind of stuff most Transformer fans are into. At least at that time, it wasn't the kind of stuff they wanted to see. Then we have another series without Starscream, and that is Beast Wars. Now, altogether, I consider Beast Wars to kind of be an anomaly among Transformers and kids' cartoons, kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, in regards to how well the plots and characters were handled. I watched this show all the way through and never thought at a point like, where's Starscream, or, you know, feeling that absence of his character, because the other characters were so good that they didn't make you feel any kind of void. Now, it is worth mentioning that Starscream does have an appearance in the series, and it's a pretty cool episode, but he definitely isn't a major character. Also worth mentioning, unlike Beast Machines, Beast Wars does kind of have characters who fill in for Starscream's role, such as Pterosaur, Tarantulas, and I would say Waspinator. But if you're going to try to say, look, it's those characters, those Starscream characters who made the show great, in my opinion, they were cool and all, but they really, really weren't what held Beast Wars together. If it was just them, and other than that, it was like a typical Transformers series, Beast Wars wouldn't be looked at how it is today. So that sums up Beast Wars. Then we have the Robots in Disguise 2001 series. I really don't know how to look at this show because it was almost like set up to be a filler show. You know, nothing was really that well developed within the show. None of the characters were that interesting. It never made me emotional. It never got too dramatic, too exciting, made you think. I mean, it just totally wasn't that kind of show. It really wasn't even that funny, and I'm sure some people would argue that it was, but really wasn't into the humor of that type of show. I don't even know if Starscream being in there would have helped the show. I mean, I think characters like Skybite, Slapper, Gas Skunk, and Darkscream kind of filled in for the Starscream role, and they definitely didn't save the show, though they weren't horrible. So that's Robots in Disguise, and then we have the new Robots in Disguise cartoon. Now, you already have a lot of people jumping aboard the bandwagon to hate on this show. I haven't quite taken that approach yet because I'm trying to stay objective towards it, though it doesn't look like it's going to be all that great. But it will be interesting to see how the show is handled without Starscream as a main villain, because it seems like with Transformers Animated and Transformers Prime, we're used to Transformers cartoons having Starscream as a significant character, so I do think that will be interesting to see how they pull that off. It does seem like this show's going to have a diverse cast of characters that isn't going to be super dry, so whether it's good or bad, I don't think it's going to be one of those situations where we feel like there's a void because Starscream's gone or all the characters are just horrible, one of those type of things. We'll just have to see with that show. So, analyzing all of this, I think whether you like Starscream or not, you would have to admit that he definitely is a pretty significant character in the grand scheme of Transformers. I mean, as mentioned, he's had many appearances, and often within those appearances, he has a major role. I would go as far to say he's probably the most often developed character, and probably drives the most stories. So if Starscream is so prominent in Transformers, is he the main character of Transformers, and should he have his own cartoon? No. My opinion here is that Starscream is a really good character overall, but it's because he functions best as a supporting character. Discussing each of Starscream's character in depth would take a very, very long time, so I'm going to just try to sum it up as best I can. I think Starscream overall can be defined as a foil character. I think one of the reasons, and like I said, there are a lot of different reasons people might like him, but I think one of the big ones is that he provides contrast and difference amongst the more serious and less personal characters of the show. With saying that, I don't think he has the qualities that could make for the main character of a show. He feels too much of that supporting kind of problem-creating character. We kind of like to see Starscream either create problems for the main characters, or in some cases we like seeing him react to problems, but overall I think it's more problems he's causing for either the main good guys or the main bad guys. So he works much better in that role. Plus, he doesn't have many desirable qualities. I mean, a lot of times if you have a villain as the main character, they need some good qualities. Other than a few Starscreams, he really doesn't have many good qualities. Maybe a show about an Armada-type Starscream would work, but even with him, you've got to remember, he started out as a much less prominent character who seemed sort of like a bad guy who basically got picked on more than the rest of them. So he kind of needed that time as a side character for us as the viewers to build enough interest in him to want to know about his greater story. And I don't think that detracts from a character at all. I think there are a lot of good characters who are first developed as side characters and then brought into the forefront, rather than being thrown in our face right away. We're given time to kind of like them in that minor role. For those of you who watch Walking Dead, you would know Daryl Dixon is a really good example of this character, rather than him just being thrown at the viewers and, like we're forced to like him. We get to make that opinion, and we are really intrigued by his character, so we want to learn more about him. And then he gets bigger focus later on in the show. Starscream, at least Armada Starscream, works better like that than being the main character in the beginning. I've seen some shows, or more or less certain animes, start off with sort of this type of character, like a super angsty, overall serious, kind of whiny character in the beginning, and I just don't think it works out as well. I think you need some other character to be the main character, and then have that other character develop. Not that it could never work, but especially in Transformers' case, I don't think we want to see it, and I don't think most Transformer fans would settle for any Starscream being the main character, even if they like him. They like him being in his role. Now, is Starscream essential to a Transformers series being good? No, definitely not. Shows with Starscream can be good. For example, Beast Wars, an excellent show, and Starscream only had a minor appearance. And these shows can use but don't need characters who carry the essence of Starscream. But unfortunately, I feel like Starscream has really become the crutch character for the writers. it seems sort of like they come up with a cast. Let's see, maybe we have a strong guy, an old guy, the sparky young guy, the young guy who's kind of learning how to be leader, that kind of thing. And they don't have the feeling that it's a very interesting cast. So instead of making those characters more interesting, trying to come up with some new characters to add to that cast or replace some of them with more original, less archetype-ish characters, they just throw in Starscream. And a lot of times it works really well, but it prevents us from seeing Transformers being taken in many different directions, and I think that's unfortunate. As far as the future of Starscream, I mean, there's always going to be Starscream figures. I would say as long as Transformers runs, Starscream's going to be around, even if he skips a series or so. You know, we're always going to have Starscream there as far as figures go. The RID cartoon, I think he's going to be in Season 2. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he somehow got away from the Predacons and returns, or maybe they kill him and he comes back as a ghost, something like that. There's kind of this saying, like, if you don't see a character die on screen, or I don't know, if you don't see their remains, then they probably aren't dead. I think that's true in Starscream's case, and I think this would be good. I would like to see them close up his story in more of a formal way, and I would like to see him make an appearance in the next cartoon. Transformers 5, I really doubt he's going to make an appearance, and I really hope they don't bring him back. I mean, that would kind of feel like just catering to the fans, and I really don't like when they do that. I would rather them work with the characters who are alive and or add new characters and further develop them. Future cartoons, yep, he's going to definitely be around. You know, we have Robots in Disguise being a conclusion of Prime, even if he's dead within that timeline. The Prime series will probably at most only be a trilogy, unless it goes on for like 17 years or something like that. I don't think it's going to overtake the Transformers cartoon franchise, so I think we're definitely going to see Starscream make more appearances throughout the cartoons. And while I would like to see Starscream make at least an occasional appearance, I would really like him to have more of a backstage role sometimes and not appear at all at some series. And also not always having that Starscream archetype, you know, come up with some more original characters, or at very least, if you're going to have Starscream, develop him in a different way, sort of like they did in Armada and Cybertron, but not different like Energon tried to pull it off, because everything Energon tried to pull off was horrible, but that's another discussion. Anyways, my closing thoughts, Starscream's great, but he's not necessary to Transformers. Not looking at individual series and characters, just looking at, let's say, one name with a consistent type of personality, I would say Starscream is probably the best Transformers character, pretty much for all his appearances and his contributions to the story. I would say he's even better than Optimus and Megatron. I mean, maybe not better than Optimus. You might be able to argue that from series to series. Definitely better than Megatron. Maybe I'm just not a huge Megatron fan, but I'll probably do some video on the future on my favorite characters in particular series, because if you're going to say that, I don't think any particular Starscream's going to top the list, but I might do that sometime in the future. And like I said, they could still have him occasionally appear, but I don't think he has to be in Transformers for it to succeed. Anyways, that's my thoughts on this long discussion matter. You can leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you like Starscream? Do you hate him? Which Starscream is your favorite? Would you like to see him appear in future Transformers series? And most importantly, do you kind of agree with what I'm saying, that he is sort of like the most important character to Transformers at this point, has driven the most stories, and has kind of had the biggest emphasis if you're to look at all the cartoon series? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, along with any topic suggestions you might have. It could be something like this, that's sort of just a general Transformers discussion topic. It could be related to Transformers 5, the Age of Extinction toy line, or the upcoming Robots in Disguise cartoon. Also, if you're interested in more Transformers news and commentary, you can check out my playlist and channel. I have various Transformers playlists, such as Transformers 5 discussion topics, a playlist for all my character comparison videos, and much more. You can also check out my Transformers stop motion videos. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, stay tuned, and have a good one, guys.